With the New York Giants 2024 preseason in the books, we take a look back at the good, the bad, and the ugly with Coach Gene Clemons. That's coming your way next on the LockOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI.com, which is where you can find my written work, as well as the written work of our guest today, Gene Clemons, Coach Gene Clemons, who contributes to New York Giants on SI. And before we get to Coach Gene, welcome on in to my everydayers, to my Blue Crew community members, and everybody in between. Thank you for making us part of your day here at the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell so that you are alerted every time we post a new video. And like the video. It all helps us in the long run. And as mentioned, we have Coach Gene Clemons in. Coach Gene Clemons, not only a writer over on New York Giants on SI, but he's also the host of a Giant Issue podcast, which you can find on YouTube, on the New York Giants on SI channel, as well as the website. And Coach Gene, in honor of you, we're going to do the good, the great, and the ugly, GGU, of the New York Giants, not just of the Jet game, which quite honestly there was a lot of ugly to talk about, but just in general, the preseason as we get ready to see what the 53-man roster looks like. So welcome on in, Gene.
Thank you for having me. It's good to have the preseason over if that's what we're going to get in the preseason. I really don't like what's happened to the preseason. All across the NFL, some teams still, I think, do it the right way, or at least the way that I grew up with it being. And then others do what the Giants did, I guess. I don't understand it. I don't really get it. But it's done now. And so now we can turn all of our attention to week one as we wrap up this preseason.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you, by the way. I was saying last night how I used to enjoy preseason, and now I just can't wait till it's over. But anyway, Gene, let's do big takeaways here. What did we learn about this Giants roster, this Giants franchise, based on what we saw develop, not just in the preseason games, but the daily camp reports and just in general? What have we learned about this team?
I think the first thing we can look at right now is this team's not going to be good against the run. Like there's no way to be confident in the fact that the Giants are going to be able to stop the run, which, by the way, is the only reason that Shane Bowen is here. Shane Bowen is here to stop the run. And there's nothing that I've seen in the preseason that tells me that this team is going to be able to stop the run. When we did see the first team defense, they didn't do a very good job of stopping the run, right? Against Houston, there were several runs that we saw that they were able to have success on. And then as soon as those starters left, it just became floodgates. And we saw the same thing in last night when we were watching the Jets game, where they just ran down the Giants' throat on a defensive line that is supposed to bolster some more young, talented, explosive elements inside to be able to stop the run. Nothing. With linebackers, like, linebackers are only as good as the front line. And I don't know why people don't give this more credence, but your linebackers cannot operate if your front line doesn't do the job of occupying the blocks of the offensive line. And so the fact that they were able to run means that they were able to get up on the linebackers. And the only way that happens is if your interior defensive linemen aren't commanding double teams because they're wreaking havoc at the line of scrimmage. That's something that will 100% have to be watched early on in the season. If teams are having success running the ball versus the Giants, then someone's going to have to explain to me why Brian Daboll hired Shane Bowen, because even in the Hard Knocks, the thing that he talked about with Shane Bowen was his ability to stop the run. I thought it was smoke and mirrors because I believe that the reason that the Titans' run defense was so good is because their pass defense was so terrible. I think I've actually said that to you on a podcast in the past, is that their run defense was only good because their pass defense was so atrocious that people just decided to pass the ball more. Very similar to what Minnesota was in 2022 when they let everybody pass on them and the run numbers look better because everybody passed the ball on them. I digress. I think that's one thing I'm taking away from this defensively. And then offensively, we have to ask the question of, have they really developed offensive line depth? Right? Because what we saw yesterday was not anything remotely near offensive line depth. It looked bad from several positions, including the person that's supposed to be the starting center, who looked bad, and he's looked bad this entire time. Like, he's come off of a bad year. He is now heading into year 2, dealing with injuries and looking bad when he's out there. So I think the trenches, to me, has given the most cause for trepidation going into week 1 than anywhere else on the field. People will talk about Daniel Jones. I do. A lot of people are really like fixated on the secondary. I'm not necessarily that fixated on the secondary because everything that happens in front of the secondary dictates what happens in the secondary. So I'm looking at the trenches now, and I have big questions.
Yeah, the offensive line depth last night against the Jets, not very good, not at all. And it was alarming because this is a unit that, kind of looked good in the summer. And that poses the question, Gene. I mean, you're a football coach. So when you evaluate, when you divide your team into offense and defense and you do your evaluation, how do you determine if one side actually looks good versus the other side looking bad and making the other side looking good? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was one of the questions I think that many people had about the Giants wide receiver core during training camp, because they were having success versus the Giants secondary. And the question was, well, is this receiving core really, really good, or is this defensive backfield really, really bad? I don't think the preseason did anything to give us any insight into that, right? Because not only did the secondary really kind of hold up overall, in the Houston game, they did exactly what was asked of them. They're built to bend but not break and let the front do their job and get to the quarterback. Well, if the front doesn't get to the quarterback, then you're just going to see a whole bunch of 10-yard and 12-yard and 13-yard completions, which is what Houston did. But versus the Lions and versus the Jets, mostly because the Jets were able to just run the ball down their throats, you didn't really get to see whether or not that secondary is like good or bad. Like, we don't really know. And vice versa, because the wide receivers, the receiving core didn't play much in the preseason. We don't really get an opportunity to know if it can be what we think it is, because the only success we saw passing the ball consistently was when they were going up against the Houston 2s and 3s in the second quarter of that preseason game when the starters stayed in. So I think they left the preseason in a situation where we have every right to sit back and go, we don't know which is which. The offensive line looked really good versus the Houston 2s and 3s. But versus the Houston 1s, they didn't move the ball, and the quarterback ended up turning the ball over a couple times. So it's like, are they really good? Are they much better? Are they improved? Or what we're looking at just a facade based off of what we saw versus 2s and 3s and our own offense and defense going against each other?
All right, we are speaking with Coach Gene Clemons of New York Giants on SI, as well as the host of A Giant Issue, which you can find on the New York Giants on SI YouTube channel. When we come back, more about the Giants preseason, which wrapped up, concerns, positives, all that stuff. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And make sure you keep it here all week long. We've got the roster cuts, which are going to be starting probably, they might even start as early as Sunday. We probably will start to get some of the cuts that'll trickle out. We, of course, will have all that information for you, as well as analysis and breakdown and so forth. All right, we are talking with Coach Gene Clemons of New York Giants on SI. And Gene, general question here with the Giants, just big picture overall. Did they do enough, do you think, in terms of shoring up their deficiencies to where they can maybe have a better record than last year? Or do you still have some concerns? I know you mentioned some of the concerns in the last segment, but overall, big picture, is the depth still lacking in your opinion?
If I'm being honest, I don't know. Like, it's hard to tell because we didn't get to see this team perform in the preseason. We didn't get a chance. Like, I'm still buzzing on the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs, the reigning Super Bowl champions, the gold standard in the NFL right now, they play their starters in preseason. Game 1, game 2, like, they're out there. And the fact that we only got one game, one half, to see a team that has so many new parts added to it to be able to galvanize under a new play caller, like, to me, that just seems like a waste of a resource. Like, I don't care what you did in these practices. People are going to have to stop telling me that practices are real. Like, these joint practices are not real games, ladies and gentlemen. Like, they're not. They are controlled environments that just happen to have different competition. Well, guess what? The game isn't. The game is not a controlled environment. And when competition comes into play, everybody wants to win. Nobody's blowing the whistle early. Nobody's staying off the quarterbacks in a real game. Guess what they do? They do that in the joint practices. So I don't know what this team can and will be because I haven't seen enough of them in order to tell me. I will tell you this, though. I think that they have, based off of the bodies that they have, I think they have developed some depth on the offensive line. It's just not a too deep, right? We don't need to see Jeremy Azudu at tackle anymore. Like, he is not good at tackle. He wasn't good last year when he didn't have any reps, and he hasn't been good this year when he's had all the reps. Like, we can just put that to bed. Find something else for him to do, or most likely he's probably going to get cut. Like, that's where it is for me with him right now. Find somewhere else for him to play, or he's probably going to get cut because he's not a tackle. Now, Evan Neal is an interesting situation because if he's going to be the backup, that's your swing tackle. He's your swing tackle if he's your backup, right? I think Aaron Stinney is a solid pro who can be the swing guard if the plan is to play Van Roten as the right guard. I actually think, from what I've seen so far, Van Roten has played better at center than John Michael Smith has played at center. And if John Michael Smith is hurt, then why put a hurt guy out there? It's the same argument that we've had with Evan Neal for the last 2 years, right? Let him get fully healthy, let him get stronger, and then allow him to go back into the position. But he's been bad. So you move Van Roten over, and Stenny comes in. Now who's your backup guard? And your backup guard center, that becomes the issue. So if Schmidt is healthy, you give him the run because you want to make sure that he can do what he can do when he's protected by two quality guards. Now Stenny is your backup, and then Van Roten goes as your backup center if he goes down, right? So you have those places. That's that's 7 guys. They're not gonna have more than 8 guys dressed on a regular day on the offensive line anyway. So I think as far as depth goes there, they're great. My question is, where's the depth at linebacker? We got a bunch of guys. Who's going to be the guys that pan out? And then what does your secondary look like? Not just at the 1s, but at the 2. I've heard news that Tyler Nubin is trending towards starting. Okay, if that's true, then like what does that mean for Dane Belton? What does that mean? What does that mean for the various like cornerback combinations that they have of guys who are tweeners like Darnay Holmes and Nick McLeod and those guys? Like how is this going to shape out? And on an actual game, like when we get to week 1, what is that secondary going to look like? Not only at the starters, but at the backup positions and in the packages when you go with your nickel package, and then when you go with your dime package, which is supposed to move, a guy like Isaiah Simmons into that money position, which is that second linebacker, but we haven't really seen it, so we don't really know how that's going to work because they didn't play in the preseason. Ta-da! Like, so it like when you say, hey, where do they need to have they done enough? I don't really know. I am surprised they didn't add another cornerback, but that doesn't mean they won't do that once they see cut downs, right? I think that's when they bring in another cornerback. I am surprised they didn't go out and get a legitimate backup center, like somebody who has just played center. If you've had so much injuries with John Michael Smith. Outside of that, I mean, what else are we trying to get them to get? Like they can't get any more wide receivers. The wide receiving group is loaded. All of the linebackers they have kind of all fit the fit and the design of what they want their linebackers to be. It's just, have we seen enough of them versus good competition to say he can definitely do the job? We don't know. And then their running backs are their running backs. They've clearly devalued that position because they want to be able to throw the ball all over the place. But for what it's worth, the running backs have probably had the best preseason of anybody, right? Like they have been the ones, that running back group has been the ones that have shown explosiveness, that shown playmaking ability on a regular basis outside of what we saw from Slayton and Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors in the week 2 game versus Houston when they went up against the 2s. Like those guys showed explosiveness in that part of the game, but the running backs have shown explosiveness the entire preseason. Outside of Singletary, who had the one I think 10, 11-yard run versus Houston, and then a bunch of like kind of spotty runs after that. They've probably been the most dynamic group of all of the groups, especially because I think before the Jets game, we would have maybe said the offensive line, but then they just played atrocious in this Jets game, outside of one person that nobody wants to admit because they just want to lump him in with all the other people who played bad. Evan Neal, who I thought played really, really well and looked probably as spry as he's looked until he went out with some type of ankle, whatever that he went out with, which is another story.
Neal did look good as a run blocker. The pass pro a little slow, but run blocking is an element of his game that just doesn't get enough credit, I think.
Well, it never gets much credit. And then the pass blocking, I just think people are wrong. I think people are wrong. Okay. I just don't understand what y'all think offensive tackles are supposed to do with these ultra athletic edge rushers. Like he's keeping the guys outside. Almost every single play, nobody was able to just, like what you saw from Jeremy Azudu is not what you saw from Evan Neal.
Mm-hmm.
They did not look the same. And the fact that people keep making it seem as if they were the same shows me that there's just an inherent bias in what they believe Evan Neal is supposed to be able to do versus what he really should be able to do against guys who are like ultra explosive off the edge. The Jets have probably the deepest defensive line in all of football. They have talent all over the place. It wasn't a surprise that the one joint practice they had, the Jets dominated. Like, it wasn't surprising. They have a dominant defense. They had a dominant defense last year. They're going to have a dominant defense again this year. So, and I plan on doing a breakdown of it, and looking at it, because I want to zero in on every snap and let people see what it looked like and what he's supposed to do. Because again, a sack is never just a sack. It's three factors. It's the tackle, it's the quarterback, it's the blocker, it's the quarterback, and it's the scheme. And all three have a bearing in this. And there are certain things that this team does schematically that does not help their tackles. There are things that these quarterbacks do, especially a guy like Tommy DeVito does, that does not help the tackles out. And then there's sometimes the tackles are a little heavy-legged. But they're offensive linemen. They're not edge rushers. They're not even built the same. It used to be where the offensive and defensive line looked similar. Now the offense and defensive line don't look anything alike. Defensive linemen look like former wide receivers that have been converted into defensive linemen. We put 45 pounds on this 6'4", 210-pound wide receiver, and now he's an edge rusher. The offensive linemen, they look like they've played offensive line their entire life. They've been big and giant and hulking forever.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Giant fans, don't go anywhere. We're going to have much more with Coach Gene Clemons right after this. Hey, Giant fans, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but who might be open for the perfect role. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours when they use LinkedIn. And did you know that LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier? They've just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Find out why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Hey, Giant fans, thank you so much for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. You can find the link to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast in the description so that you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. You got me, Patricia Traina, and we are coming to you on Sunday, a rare Sunday, because the Giants just wrapped up their preseason slate of football game. They lost to the Jets. Not a very inspiring game, but you know what? This final score doesn't matter. It's more or less the play of the different players, the injuries, who got hurt, and there were quite a few injuries, mostly to the bottom of the roster. And of course, just an opportunity for the coaches to evaluate. And Gene, one topic we kind of skimmed over, and I want to revisit with you, is the quarterback depth. Now, you've made it very clear about your feelings about Daniel Jones, who did not play in the game yesterday. Drew Lock did not play in the game, but we saw a lot of Tommy DeVito. I thought Tommy had a mostly mixed bag, bordering on bad. I saw times when he was holding the ball too long. I saw missed opportunities down the field. Being at the game, I was able to put binoculars on the entire all 22 and see guys that were open. How do you feel about this Giants quarterback room in general?
Let me start. Let me just kind of ask you a question. If right now I told you I'll give you Adrien Martinez or Tommy DeVito, who are you taking?
I probably would take Martinez.
And that's the problem. That's the problem that this Giants team has. Everybody's taking Adrien Martinez. You know what? Everybody took Adrien Martinez in college. So why would it be surprising that Adrien Martinez would be a better quarterback than Tommy DeVito in the NFL? He's been a better quarterback than Tommy DeVito his entire life. Adrien Martinez was one of the highest ranked high school quarterbacks coming out of high school. When he went to Nebraska, he was the first freshman quarterback, true freshman quarterback to start in forever. He transferred to Kansas State as a senior, not because he couldn't get it done at Nebraska, but because he had felt he had gone as far as he could go at Nebraska and wanted to elevate himself. He got underestimated. He went over to the UFL and has been balling out at the UFL. This is a guy who has had success playing the quarterback position at every level he's ever been at, right? That's not Tommy DeVito. And for as much as we might like the story of Tommy DeVito, he's just not good. He is serviceable if everything is where it should be. He's not good. And he hasn't been good against second and third and fourth team guys. And that's a problem. I thought it was a mistake not to bring back Tyrod Taylor. Now I think it might be uber costly if Daniel Jones goes down. Now, what I'll say is, if you look around the NFL, there's teams that are going to have to cut some quarterbacks that are better than Tommy DeVito and most likely better than Drew Lock if Drew Lock can't stay on the field, which is an entirely different story. I want to go back to this though, and I've said this on the last couple of podcasts. Take the contract out of it. This team represents the best opportunity that we have to see the best of what Daniel Jones can do. So, I think that if I'm looking optimistically, this could be Daniel Jones' best year ever as a Giant. That's going to be great. And if he has his best year as a Giant, they're going to win more games than they won last year because they'll probably be healthier and all that. I don't discount the fact that the record was the record last year because so many people got hurt. I think they win more games if other people stay healthy. So I think this is a great opportunity for Daniel Jones and for the Giants to get the best out of Daniel Jones. But what's behind him, I don't have any confidence in at all. I don't have any confidence in Drew Lock because why would I have ever had any confidence in Drew Lock? And I don't have any confidence in Tommy DeVito because why would I have ever had any confidence in Tommy DeVito? Even in the games where he looked good, he did really bad things. So it's like, even at his best, he's done things to get you beat. And I don't like my quarterback to live in that world. I don't want my quarterback to be mixed bag, right? I want my quarterback to be in one bag and that bag be positive moving forward. Now, if you make some mistakes, that's different. Everybody makes mistakes. But if your mistakes are so constant, like, hey, this tackle just got beat on an inside rush move. There's nobody to the outside, but instead of moving to my left to create more time to throw the ball, I'm just going to stay there because I don't have any pocket awareness. We saw Daniel Jones in that very same situation with Andrew Thomas, where the guy took an inside move on Andrew Thomas and he washed him down. And we saw Jones just slide to his left and deliver a football. Tommy DeVito had that same opportunity. He stood there and got sacked by the guy that beat a Zoodoo inside on the left. Those are things that when you've spent so many years in college and now you're year 2 in the NFL and you're not 23 years old, you can't still be making these mistakes. That's how you are able to carve out a long NFL career, by being safe and being aware and being and playing the game more from here than from here. Because here is where you stay safe and you make great decisions. Here is where you make splashy, explosive plays, but also where you get beat. And that's the problem with Tommy DeVito right now.
And of course, for those of you listening, Coach Gene was pointing to his
My
head
apologies.
and his cards. Yeah.
My apologies. The head is where you win games and stay safe at. The heart is where you make flashy plays, but you ultimately lose games because you do things out of emotion. My apologies to all the listeners out there.
No, all good, Coach. All good. All right, final question for you. Brian Daboll is going to take over the play calling. Can he salvage this offense, which, kind of has lacked that explosive ability? Now, obviously, you can't be explosive on every play, but do you think Daboll, as the play caller, is going to make that much more of a difference in terms of the success of this offense? And if so, why?
You think it was interesting that we didn't see not one shot taken yesterday in this offense, like one legitimate shot taken? I think that Brian Daboll is still trying to find his footing, right? It's been a while since he's called plays consistently, since he's put the game plan together and then been able to. I think he's talented. I think he's a talented play caller. I think that he will, when he starts game planning for teams, which he hasn't done because this is the preseason, right? Like when he starts game planning for teams, we've seen them come out with game plans that move the ball down the field, right? What we haven't seen is the consistency in being able to execute the game plan throughout the game. And so I think he's going to put them in positions to be successful. It's going to be up to the trigger man, Daniel Jones, to be able to put the ball where it needs to be in order for his receivers to make plays. And then I think it'll be up to those playmakers to make plays. I think the offensive line will be fine. If I had to, there's no way it'll be as bad as it was last year because, well, I take that back. Unless there's a bunch of injuries on the offensive line again, right? There's a bunch of injuries on the offensive line. It's going to be bad as it was last year. But they had injuries to everybody. At one point, they had 5 people who did not start on the roster starting, right? Like, not just they were backups. Like, no, they were just not even on the team, and then they were starting. Like, that's crazy. Like, that is bonkers to have that many injuries that lead you to having people off the street starting for you on the offensive line. If they're healthy on the offensive line, and I know that's an if that we have to put a circle around, right? If they're healthy on the offensive line, they're going to give Daniel Jones enough time to be able to deliver the ball. If he delivers the ball, they'll have success because I do think that this wide receiving core has become a weapon and not an albatross. Like, they have guys that they're going to have to cut that would likely make some other teams. Like, they have talent. Allen Robinson has looked really good this preseason. What are you going to do with him, right? Like, he's the number 5. He's wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 right now. Isaiah McKenzie has looked decent as a special teamer. He's a receiver. Do you keep an extra receiver to keep a McKenzie? You've got Gunnar Olszewski. He plays receiver, but he's a special teamer. How many of those guys are you going to keep? And that's before we start talking about, like, the other receivers. Like, there's still more bodies. And by the way, what number is Allen Robinson going to wear if he makes this team? Because it's not going to be 5. This isn't college. We don't have an offensive 5 and a defensive 5. I don't like seeing it. I think that's really corny. But I digress. I think this receiving core was built to be the star. And by the way, I don't think you even remotely think about trading Darius Slayton. You got to keep Slayton on this team, and then maybe mid-season or whenever that trade deadline comes, if there's a feeling that, hey, this season's not going where we want it to go, let's get something for Slayton. from a team that's looking to make a playoff push, cool. But if not, Darius Slayton needs to be on this team. Like he's still him. He's still that guy. And I'm looking forward to seeing this entire wide receiving core work because I do believe that they have depth and explosiveness at many different positions. And I think that it can become the strength of this team.
All right. Well, the next 48 hours or so should be very interesting as the Giants, they have a lot of decisions to make. Some of them are going to be driven by injury, a lot, of course, by performance. And of course, we'll have to see what happens up with the waiver wire. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting decisions that come up with the waiver wire. And for those of you, Mr. Coach Dean, it sounds like you're going to do a breakdown of Evan Neal's snaps. And what else are you planning to do for New York Giants on SI?
I definitely want to do an in-depth breakdown of Evan Neal snaps. I don't like the way the fan base just automatically lumps him in as with everything that happened yesterday. It was really weird when I said that he played well and John Michael Schmitz played poorly, and the responses was, "Did you watch the game?" And I was like, "Really? Like what? What are we talking about?" So I plan on do that. I am going to do a roster prediction on a Giant issue that will drop Monday morning. So I'll have my roster prediction there as well. And then as we start getting into what this is going to look like, some elements from the preseason that we might want to take away and say, hey, these are going to be plays that will be kind of linchpins of what we do going into the regular season, especially in the run game and how they're moving offensive linemen around and getting them more into gap scheme and a little bit less of man and zone scheme this season. So some good things coming over the next week and some change as we kind of count down until week 1, but no more football from the NFL side until then. And that's sad because I can't wait for the season to start. Regardless of what we might feel about, where we think the trajectory of the team is, I'm always excited because everybody starts 0-0. And so 2 years ago in 2022, nobody expected 7-1 start, right? So it can happen, and it can be a great season if some things fall into place the way that they hope they fall into place. And I'm just here to be able to see it and talk about it and report and break it down.
All right, sounds good. And of course, we on the LockOn Giants podcast, this was a special edition following the end of the preseason. We're going to track the roster cuts. We're going to break all that down and just keep you up to date. The Giants will be practicing this week, so we'll see kind of how all that comes together, and we'll keep you posted on everything, all things Giants. So Giant fans, want to thank you for tuning in, as always, to this special edition. Coach Gene, thank you for coming on a Sunday morning. Giant fans, make sure you keep it here all week long. Make sure you check out New York Giants on SI. Make sure you check out A Giant Issue as hosted by Gene Clemons. You can find that over on the New York Giants on SI channel. So for Gene Clemons, I'm Patricia Traina, and we will see you again tomorrow, Giant fans.